Testing, 1, 2, 3. What is this life full of care? We have no time to stand and stare. No time to stand beneath the boughs and stare as long as the sheep or cats. Is it working? No. Do it in reverse. Do me a favour, will you say something? Or I'll see the camera switch to you. Hello. So, does it? Yeah. No. Oh no. There's a bit. Yeah. Ever so
Speak again.
Testing, 1, 2, 3. How's that sound now?
Do you need to speak into the microphone?
Does that work? No. I'm used to bellowing at rooms. I can do that, but I just want to make sure that I'm not yelling at people remotely. You can all hear in the room. Yeah.
Yeah, you can hear it in the room. It's the people that are not in the room.
Yeah.
You
And
need
there's the microphone in there.
Yeah, exactly.
It's working, great.
But you need the microphones. Otherwise, for the people online, they need the microphones.
Oh, fine. So this records online, right?
That's the sound to the people online.
And then right, that makes sense.
This is the extra spare one.
I think this one is on.
Yes, it's on. The light is green. They're all on.
Okay. And are we now live streaming? We are. So I've got to stop saying unpleasant things. There's that.
But he's not speaking now.
No, but when you speak.
Is that? Yeah. So that's great. That's happening. Great. So shall I? Okay. I think we're ready to start at last. Well, welcome everybody, and in particular, welcome to those of you who are watching via live stream wherever you are. My apologies, first of all. We've had a little bit of a delay in starting, but the technical difficulties have now been overcome. So, welcome to our event here live in Brussels, International Law in the Face of Autocracy, examining the role of the UAE. This is a legal debate. My name is Rhys Davies, and I'm a barrister at Temple Garden Chambers in London. We are co-hosting this event with Naima Consultancy, who've been very helpful in organising today, and we're here at the Full Circle Club in Brussels. The purpose of this seminar is to shine the spotlight on the UAE and to hopefully engage in a lively debate about what to do, what the challenges are insofar as Emirati autocracy and repression is concerned. I'm always conscious at these sorts of events that we mustn't start off from a position of saying the UAE is bad, because there are a lot of rather wonderful redeeming things about the Emirates. But equally, one of the reasons that we are here today is that we are all conscious that there is a dark side to the Emirati success story and the glitz and the glamour of Dubai, and to perhaps a slightly lesser extent, but nevertheless Abu Dhabi as well. It has this rather sinister aspect to it, and you'll hear from the speakers in due course, and I'll introduce them in a few minutes' time, about the reality of what happens when things go wrong in the UAE, but also the way that the Emirates approaches democracy, the way that it approaches both domestic and transnational repression, and the way that it seeks to influence international organizations and other countries in a way which suits its agenda. And as part of that agenda, the speakers that you will hear from today will address whether or not the face that the Emirates presents to the world is in fact a true and accurate portrait, or whether instead it's actually something which represents the success of spin. So that's, I hope, a helpful a very brief overview. Let me just introduce our speakers. First of all, we do have one particular absence today. My business partner and fellow barrister, Ben Keith, who was due to speak, unfortunately can't join us. His wife has decided to have a baby this morning, and so he's used that as an excuse not to attend. So we shall be having words with him later on, but there we go. To my right, we have Matthew Hedges. Matt Hedges is a UK academic renowned for his research on the Middle East, particularly the UAE, for reasons which will become obvious in a few moments' time for those of you who don't know him. Matt's work, and indeed his life, came into the international spotlight. I think it was back in 2018 when he was detained, arrested, imprisoned in the UAE on charges of espionage. By way of background, Matt is a PhD, I think it's from the University of Durham, and has a particular expertise on Emirati political dynamics, and his dissertation was published under the title of Reinventing the Sheikhdom, Clan Power and Patronage in MBZ's UAE, which is available in all good bookshops, I believe, and I've got a signed copy, so I can recommend it. But on a more serious note, Matt was detained in the UAE in May of 2018 when he was arrested at Dubai International Airport on suspicion of spying for the UK government. His detention was likely part of a broader context of Emirati concerns about security and espionage. Later that year, in November 2018, after months of solitary confinement and interrogation, Matt was sentenced to life imprisonment on charges in relation to state security and espionage. Perhaps unsurprisingly, his detention and trial, although I say perhaps trial in inverted commas, because I suspect Matt will tell us in due course that the process that he went through did not represent anything which independent and fair-minded international observers would regard as a fair trial. That trial, unsurprisingly, drew international criticism, highlighting issues around due process and the treatment of foreign nationals. Very unusually for the UK government, they publicly disavowed, if that's the right way of putting it, they certainly publicly stated that Matt was not, in fact, a British spy. And consequent to that, Matt was pardoned. And I think it's important to reference the fact that it was a pardon, not an acquittal. So in theory, Matt, I suspect you are still, strictly speaking, a convicted British spy. Anyway, he was released as part of a pardon and a clemency gesture. And since then, Matt's become an advocate for academic freedom and the rights of researchers working in politically sensitive environments. And his experience, which I'm sure he'll tell us about in more detail in due course, underscores the risks posed to academics and indeed commentators more broadly, particularly in the UAE. People who around the world, and again particularly in the UAE, ask reasonable questions of societies which appear to be open but which turn out to be closed. So Matt remains a very influential voice in Middle Eastern studies, and his work provides a very critical and useful perspective on the risks faced by academics. So Matt, thank you for coming and welcome. We also have Fala Syed, who is a human rights officer at the MENA Rights Group. Fala litigates cases of human rights violations and conducts policy research on patterns of violations in the MENA region. It's a great privilege to have a representative for MENA Rights with us here today. MENA document violations. They engage in strategic litigation and policy advocacy. And it's a privilege to have a representative of an organization that does so much good work on focusing attention on rights breaches in the region, and in particular in relation to the UAE. So thanks for making the trip and joining us. I think you've come from Geneva, haven't you? So again, it's a great privilege, Fala, to have you here. We also have, I think on the screen behind me, I'm not quite sure how it's working at the moment, but we have Ahmed Al Nuami, who's joining us via video link. Ahmed indeed tried to travel to be with us here in person, but due to, I understand, visa restrictions, was unable to get here, which perhaps in itself gives you some indication of the nature and scope of what can happen to dissidents when they fall foul of the Emirati regime. Ahmed is a now London-based prominent human rights activist, writer, and journalist, originally from the UAE. He's established himself as a very significant figure in advocating for human rights and educational initiatives. He's the founder of the founder and director, of the Cambridge Education and Training Centre. As a result of his activism, he is effectively in self-imposed exile from the UAE due to risk of persecution. I say self-imposed. The reality is, and Ahmed will tell you about this in due course, is that if he travelled to the UAE, he would be arrested and imprisoned. And I think it's right to say that Ahmed's brother is in detention and that Ahmed himself was part of the dragnet of the notorious UAE 94 trials, which unfolded a decade ago, and he was convicted in absentia. But despite the risks posed to Ahmed by Emirati repression, he remains a steadfast advocate for human rights, and he's used his platform to amplify the voices of those silenced by oppressive regimes, particularly the UAE. So Ahmed, welcome and thanks to you. For those of you who don't know me, as I say, my name is Rhys Davies. I'm a barrister at Temple Garden Chambers in London. I'm also the co-founder of International Human Rights Advisors. We represent individuals, governments, NGOs on matters touching upon human rights breaches around the world. We have a focus on international criminal law and international human rights. And one of the things that constantly comes across our radar is the UAE. And we represent a number of clients who are imprisoned in Dubai, in particular in the Notice Alawiyah jail. And I know that we have family members present today in the live audience here of individuals who are imprisoned in that jail. And it's worth pointing out that it's easy for lawyers sometimes to sit on podiums like this and say, well, my client's innocent and he should be released and all these sorts of things. Obviously, we would say that because that's what we do. That's our job. Often we're paid to. Sometimes we do it pro bono, but that's our job to say these things. But in the cases of the individuals that we represent, it's really important to note that in all the cases we're involved in, I think it's right to say all the cases, we have applied to the United Nations for findings about the individuals who have been detained. Matt will probably touch upon this, and I suspect Ahmed will touch on this as well in due course. The conditions of detention in Emirati jails are staggeringly poor. These are conditions that amount to torture. But the individuals that we represent who are held in those conditions, and in some cases who have been held there for years and years and years, perhaps decades, those individuals have been arbitrarily detained. And the point that I was hoping to make a few moments ago is don't ask me, ask the United Nations, because we have secured findings from the United Nations Working Group on Arbitrary Detention that individuals like Charles Ridley or Ryan Cornelius or Zach Shaheen, who are all British and US citizens, have been arbitrarily detained. So everything I suspect that you will hear from our speakers this morning is to some extent their personal opinion and their perspective on the things that they have seen and experienced. Of course it would be. But every time you ask yourself, well, is there truth to this? Just look at the evidence. Look at what the United Nations have said. Look at what organizations like Amnesty or Human Rights Watch or Fair Trials or Media Rights, look at what they say about these things, and you will find reams and reams of evidence that show it's not just the perspective of, in inverted commas, activists. There are hard facts underlying all this, which demonstrates that there is a real issue with the UAE's adherence to international human rights and basic norms. And as I said at the outset, the purpose of today is for us to be asking these questions and have a conversation about what's happening and perhaps to some extent what we can do. One of the reasons that we are here in Brussels in particular is that we wanted to talk about the relevance of Emirati autocratic processes and transnational repression for Europe. And I really do believe that this issue is not one which can be overstated. We're here in the home of the EU and its commitment to democratic values, to human rights, and the rule of law means that the EU and European nations generally need to remain vigilant about the actions of autocratic regimes such as the UAE. Only last week in the UK, there were a handful of very prominent press articles, the Telegraph and the Financial Times, which I suspect somehow have an Emirati hand behind them, or possibly a link, in which the UAE is effectively saying, or the case is being made, that they have been wronged in some way by the UK over their actions in Sudan, over the attempted purchase of the Telegraph Group. And that's important because what we're seeing at the moment is a sort of pushback, a sort of poor me attitude from the UAE, saying that they are the victims in some way of neo-colonialism, of illiberalism, of smear campaigns by, in this particular case, by the UK media. But it goes almost without saying, one of the reasons, perhaps the principal reason, is when the UAE tried to purchase the Telegraph Media Group, one of the marquee media groups in the UK, the Telegraph is, irrespective of whether or not you necessarily agree with the politics of that newspaper, is a very well-respected ancient newspaper and perhaps represents the heart of Middle England. When that purchase and that takeover was on the cards, people picked up the rock and looked at what was underneath it, and they didn't like what they saw. And that's the real reason that UK parliamentarians and that the Fourth Estate in the UK has been so critical. And let's not forget, in a European context in particular, but this is also true of the UK, but in a European context, Emirati actions pose significant threats. I suspect Matt will touch on this. This is a country which doesn't respect democratic institutions and civil liberties. And for example, we know, it's a matter of fact, that the Emirates' use of spyware like Pegasus has been used to target journalists, activists, and even political figures. So we see effectively a direct attack on European institutions, values, and politicians. And it's also worth noting that the UAE has a very, very broad portfolio of strategic investments and partnerships within Europe, which could compromise policy decisions and international relations. And it's important that Europe continues to stand up and set a global precedent for defending human rights and maintaining international law. And by scrutinizing in a European context these issues, Europe can reinforce its own democratic framework and ensuring that partnerships with the UAE or similar regimes, for that matter, do not effectively endorse those repressive practices. And we're at a time now of elections in Europe and the UK, and understanding the UAE's tactics of repression and influence is going to help Europe develop better protective measures against cyber threats and foreign interference. So this sort of vigilance, I say, is necessary and essential for maintaining the integrity of European institutions. That's what I'd like to say at this stage about the broader context of this meeting today. I think what we'll probably do in terms of speakers is that we'll start off, Matt, with you. And Matt, obviously, I've introduced you. I think what would be helpful for our audience is to perhaps know a little bit about the narrative, how you came to be in the UAE, what happened to you, why the response of the UK government was. I think I know that it was far from perfect, but you found yourself in a situation where you had to rely upon an international response to essentially domestic situation, why those international responses and scrutiny are important. And if you could tell us perhaps what your research and investigations have led you to know about UAE autocracy. That's a lot of things I've asked you to discuss. Don't feel the need to go through all of them in detail, but I think your case is particularly interesting because of the allegations made against you and because of the way that you saw firsthand. And I know some of it, by the way, and I recognise this, and I won't trespass onto matters which are painful for you, but I know that it was a deeply, deeply distressing experience for you. So I'll leave it there and hand over to you. I know there's a microphone there. So I think you probably need to you take this away. That's already turned on. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone, for coming today and for dedicating your time to sitting and listening to these experiences and hopefully being part of a broader conversation. So, to try and be brief, I had lived in the UAE with my family, who we moved out in maybe 2001, 2002. So they'd been in the country for a long time. I ended up working for a think tank that worked with the armed forces for quite a while. But I decided I'd had enough. I didn't like the lifestyle. I didn't like where I was living. It didn't sit right with me. So what I decided was to undertake a PhD, and I undertook doctoral research examining quite fundamentally, it was the process by which Mohammed bin Zayed, the president of the country, was driving the country from one of a federation to one of a united, a security-led state. And obviously, when I term it in that way, or if I explain that the principal research question was Abu Dhabi's regime security strategy, of course, this sounds weaponized. This sounds highly sensitive. But ultimately, I investigated the personal connections and the network by which Mohammed bin Zayed was reorganizing the state for a stronger foundation. Historically, the federation, the identity of the federation had been one of its most vulnerable components, with different policies, with different strategies, with different levels of interaction. But if you can retain a single focus, a single drive, that helps, at least in that perception, to make the whole part stronger. I hadn't been a vocal opponent. My research isn't critical. It is critical in an academic sense of engaging literature, but objectively or even subjectively, it was not a critical work. But that said, I traveled for 2 weeks to undertake fieldwork research. I didn't know at the time, but the Emirati state security, so it's the intelligence services, something which the KGB was the Ministry of State Security, the Stasi was the Ministry of State Security. It's that same organization that we may not have in any European state, at least at the moment. They had hacked my phone when I was in the UK, and so they were already watching me before I had flown and got to their country. Whilst in the UAE, they were following me for 2 weeks, physically hacking my phone again. And when I tried to leave, the state security abducted me. They took me to Abu Dhabi, where I was held in their facilities and due to my own survival instinct, I wasn't treated like the others that I could hear in other rooms. The other rooms were, they were being beaten, there was screaming. I could see the evidence, the physical evidence of blood, of what was going on, and I was repeatedly told that worse things could happen to me if I didn't agree to go along with their terms. To the point where they even threatened to send me to a base in Yemen. So it was made quite clear quite quickly what options I had. So when
Pause you for 1 second. Is technology
so when trying to explain or show that I know about the conventional system, the conventional legal system I don't know as much about, but I still have a decent understanding. Because I was held by state security, and state security are like an octopus whose tentacles are within every single dimension of the state. For an Emirati citizen to travel abroad, to undertake a higher education, a degree, to get a public service job, whatever it is, you have to have some form of, you have to have an interview with the state security to get that so-called on the record. So when I was held by state security, they have that sovereign authority. This wasn't a small issue. This was something of presidential connotations, especially by, in their mind, capturing a British spy. For that reason, it didn't matter what I said or did. I would only ever have been released if it was for that international pressure. And I'm very lucky that my wife was brave and strong enough to do this. And it was only after the British government really did put their foot down, but after I had been sentenced to life imprisonment. What I've learned from that experience and from my doctoral research is the true depth, is the true influence and impact of where this security state now is. The case in point of, say, surveillance, you would think of surveillance as physically watching your moves, listening to your conversations, intercepting your digital communications. But the point of surveillance is to be able to have a degree of control over you. If you have an understanding that you're being watched, your behavior is being monitored, the idea is to control it. What I've seen in the UAE is this surveillance having its maximal impact. People's behaviors, it isn't even people's behaviors anymore. It is their innate, it's their internal dialogue with themselves that's now controlled and limited. And when you can't even think freely, but you know what's going on, and you can see people are limited and they're lacking the ability to critique, to be open towards any form of ideas or any form of logic, it simply demonstrates that you're not dealing with a rational actor anymore. You're not dealing with something that is designed to make sense. You have to look at engagement, any form of situation, in a completely different prism. And I think that's probably the most fundamental component, is that you're now not dealing with a rational, with a structured, something that makes sense. So every other action that they do take part in is it's not meant to make sense, at least not to us. And I think for time, I'll leave it there, and what we'll do is we'll come back to any more questions. Thank you.
Matt, thanks for that. Just before we do move on, one thing which I just want to get your perspective on is that obviously the focus of today is the kind kind of autocratic nature. I think you have a particularly interesting perspective because you've been there when you've seen how, in our case, because we're Brits, you've seen how the UK government dealt with what I would say on the face of it is a transparently autocratic, or to put it another way, regime which doesn't respect the rule of law. Mm-hmm. What was your perspective on what the UK government, we know what they did because they did step in your case, and that is very unusual, but what was said to you, if you can share it privately, about their perspective, the government's perspective on the autocratic nature of the UAE?
There's an inherent acceptance of this behavior. There isn't they don't try to dismiss it. It is part of the state. It's an acknowledgement that this is how it works. I suppose the more difficult issue was that the UK government couldn't do anything to influence it. They either couldn't or they didn't want to, and probably both are likely. The issue from an external perspective is that looking at it from a rule of law perspective is you're talking about two separate topics. It doesn't exist, especially within the realm of state security, whose authority is ultimate. To go down further, and this is something actually I've done with Fala and Mina Rights. The Minister of State Security is the Crown Prince of Abu Dhabi. It's Mohammed bin Zayed's son, Khalid bin Mohammed bin Zayed. Several years ago, there was also a video leaked of Sheikh Isa bin Zayed. And in that video, he was shooting an Afghan dealer on the ground in the desert, shooting bullets around him. He was driving over this Afghan national. He was beating him up in the presence of policemen in uniform. It was clear torture, it was clear abuse. But when taken to court, he was acquitted because he was having a bad reaction to his medication. And that complete dual legal perspective is testament to, to what you're dealing with, and without trying to romanticize, but I don't think this would have happened, say, under the previous ruler, Sheikh Zayed, the founder of the state, because he was much more noble. People were warm and welcoming. But Mohammed bin Zayed has rewritten the entire rules, and that's where there's a quite not just negative, but a very sinister component to it. His career was in the military. He's come up through the security ranks, and that is the identity of where the state is now.
Matt, thanks for that. At the risk of testing our technology, I'm going to see if we can bring Ahmed in. Is he still with us on the line at the moment? Fine. We'll tell you what. In which case, why don't we, if we look into that, Father, I'll move to you now, please. Father, Mina Rights, as I said a few minutes ago, Mina Rights do an amazing job of focusing attention on the UAE. And as I said in my introductory remarks, what I don't want to do is sit here and spend the entire time saying this is a dreadful country, because it's not. It's an amazing country in so many ways. But we know, and you know better than I do, that it has real problems with an autocratic framework. And what Matt was just saying a few minutes ago, it's such a, not only Matt's case, but the case, the graphic case, and I'm sure a lot of us have seen the footage of the attack on that Afghan man. It seems to be symptomatic and emblematic of the Emirati attitude towards the rule of law. And I'm a lawyer, and I constantly throw around the phrase rule of law, which is, I suppose it's a term of art, but what we're really saying is that it doesn't respect fair play, and it doesn't play by its own rules. So if you were able to perhaps tell us a bit about the nature of the autocratic behaviour that we see and how that's changed. Is it getting better? Is it getting worse? I think I know the answer to this, but I'll pose the question anyway. And we also know, we saw so much attention focused on the UAE last November in COP28. And in many ways, for the Emirates, the event was something of a success. But it seems to me, and this is a profoundly leading statement, it's only a success if you're prepared to turn a blind eye to some of the stuff that we know goes on anyway, but also some of the stuff they did during the event. I suspect that if we can get Ahmed on in due course, he'll tell us about the latest round of mass arrests and mass trials. Give us your perspective on Emirati autocracy.
Yeah, sure. I mean, as you say, Emirati autocracy, and I think, just answering as well to your question that you asked to Matt, I think autocracy, in many autocratic countries, it's the legal framework, actually, that is very symptomatic of how autocratic a country is and how much it does not, respect the rule of law in an international way. But yeah, maybe I'll just start by saying that, for those of you who doesn't know much about the UAE or just knows it through, the shining Dubai and Abu Dhabi, you have to know that civic space in the UAE is just non-existent today. There's no civil society on the ground because it's way too dangerous. And several human rights defenders are still being imprisoned for acts that is related to their activism. And this crackdown is not new. It's something that has actually taken a turn in 2013 when over 100 lawyers, judges, activists who signed a petition asking for democratic reforms have been arrested by UAE authorities. The UAE authorities just did a campaign of mass arrests against these individuals. And a mass trial ensued with 94 defendants. 69 of them were sentenced to from 7 to 15 years in prison, mostly based on coerced, self-incriminating confessions. And maybe you've heard about this trial. This trial is more commonly known as the UAE 94 trial. And in the continuity of this crackdown, 10 years later, in 2023, the UAE authorities launched another campaign of repression against 84 of these same prisoners of conscience. And new charges were dropped based on the counterterrorism legal framework. And, they are currently being tried in the UAE in the second largest mass trial known as the UAE 84 trial. So yeah, I think this case is quite symptomatic of the autocratic nature of the UAE government. So I will first, touch upon or give you an overview of the legal framework that the UAE authorities use to crack down on public dissent. And then maybe tell you more about the institutional framework. Matt has already touched upon it, which is the state security. It's just that the state security is the main institutional framework that applies the counterterrorism legal framework. And then I will speak a bit about the UAE 84 trial, which actually took place during COP28, while COP28 was being praised as being a success. UAE 84 trial, the charges on the 84 prisoners of conscience were dropped during that time at the same moment in a complete media blackout. And I will end with, explaining how the UAE plays a key role in what we call transnational repression, meaning the silencing of dissenting voices against individuals who fall outside of the jurisdiction of the UAE, meaning they're either non-UAE nationals or actually non-UAE nationals outside of the UAE as well. And excuse me for my broken voice. I was sick actually for the past week, so I hope I will still be able to have a normal voice until the end. But yeah, as I said, what's really striking actually and very common in many autocratic countries is how much the legal framework itself gives the possibility or enables the authorities to repress on fundamental freedom. And in this case, it's in the UAE, it's actually the counterterrorism framework, the counterterrorism law that is mostly used against dissenting voices. And the main problem with this law is the definition of terrorism. The definition of terrorism is too broad in the counterterrorism legal framework. You can find this very easily in Article 1. We actually have a translation on the MENA Rights website, so you'd be welcome to look at it. And in this article, a terrorist act is basically any act that is committed with a terrorist purpose or result. And this latter phrasing, terrorist purpose or result, is not defined. And basically anything can be construed as having been committed with a terrorist purpose or result. And such a vague and overbroad definition will definitely allow the authorities to conflate, public criticism with terrorism. And what's also very dangerous in this law, amongst many other things, of course, is that this law actually allows the Minister of Presidential Affairs and the UAE Council of Ministers to label any organization or individual as terrorists. And actually in 2021, 4 members of the UAE 94 who were living abroad in exile were listed as terrorists on the basis of this law. Another thing that's very striking in this law is that it provides a legal basis for the detention of individuals, but beyond the completion of their sentence. So not only it provides a basis to sentence individuals, but also to hold them but beyond the completion of their sentence. And this is basically, called the Munasaha regime. And the Munasaha regime is basically just the possibility for authorities to detain these individuals under the pretext of rehabilitation. In the law, Munasaha centers are defined as administrative units aiming at the enlightenment and reform of persons deemed to pose a terrorist threat or those convicted of terrorist offenses. So basically it's just, a center to provide for the counseling and rehabilitation of, and I quote here, holders of terrorist, extremist, or divine thoughts. Which basically, it obviously can mean anything when we phrase it that way. And the problem with this regime is that the law does not require that the detention in these centers have a certain duration. So that's why we can see that there's a risk that these centers are actually used to incarcerate individuals indefinitely. Like they're just used as a pretext to incarcerate people beyond the completion of their sentence, but indefinitely. And these centers also pose a serious risk of detention incommunicado, meaning that these people are put in these centers, but they are denied any communication with their families or the outside world. And it has actually very often been used to prolong the detention of individuals, including a number of prisoners of conscience who have already served their sentence. And this has been the case concerning individuals who were prosecuted in the UAE 94 trial. So that's for the legal framework. Now, the institutional framework that applies this legal framework is the state security apparatus. It's the main authority that applies it. It's the main entity that's basically responsible for dealing with terrorism and security issues. And it has actually been responsible for systematic and widespread human rights abuses, and the massive crackdown on peaceful dissent since 2013. To such an extent, actually, that today, civic space is just non-existent in the UAE. The state security apparatus operates on the basis of a law that has actually never been made public. I think 2003 version has been leaked by the Emirates Detainee Advocacy Center. It has been made available, but it's just that the authorities themselves have never made it public. And on the basis of the leaked version of EDAC, we were able to find out that this institution actually acts without any institutional, judicial, or financial oversight. And it reports directly to the president of the UAE and is actually granted very broad powers, including, and here I quote, gather and analyze information on any political activity. And whatever that means, monitor social phenomena. Also, what we have to know is that in this law, importantly, the president of the SSA, the state security apparatus, can place suspects in custody for up to 3 months. And the decision of the SSA president are binding on all other security apparatuses. And they can basically establish security offices in any federal ministry, government office, embassies, or consulates. And two significant cases, now I can say 2 significant cases, to highlight how these framework work and how this framework operates are the UAE 94 and the UAE 84 trials. And as I had mentioned before, the UAE 94 happened in 2013, where 69 of the defendants who were tried on the basis of the counterterrorism law that I was exposing before were charged. They were mainly charged with founding, organizing, and administering an organization aimed at overthrowing the government. This is a charge that is based on the counterterrorism law. What's very interesting is that in November 2013, the United Nations Working Group on Arbitrary Detention has issued an opinion, and they have considered that the detention of these individuals is arbitrary because they were charged with, they were charged actually 4 acts that fall under their rights to freedom of expression and peaceful assembly. 10 years later, on December 7, 2023, we have learned during COP28 that new charges against most of the UAE 94 defendants were brought. Among them is, I'm going to cite a few, among them is Dr. Mohammed Al-Mansouri, a renowned international law jurist, Dr. Mohammed Al-Riken, a prominent Emirati human rights lawyer. And in this mass trial, defendants are also charged under the Emirati counterterrorism law for the establishment, endorsement, support, and financing of a terrorist organization. And this new mass trial did not only include UAE 94 defendants, it's also included individuals who are outside of the UAE 94, like Dr. Nasser bin Rhys and Ahmad Mansour. And in January 2024, the UN, actually 9 UN experts have also expressed their alarm at the new, what they call spurious terrorism charges, which were brought against civil society in this trial. And they have sent a communication to the UAE. And what's very important is that they considered these charges to be a deeply regressive step, particularly given the fact that the UAE is currently a member of the UN Security Council Counterterrorism Committee. And what they also said is that some of the defendants are currently subjected to enforced disappearances, which is a practice that we very commonly see in the UAE. They are being subjected to torture. These proceedings violate the right to a fair trial and denial or restriction of access to legal counsel. There are coerced confessions that is happening and a lack of access to judicial proceedings. So this is for the domestic side. I can go ahead and, I don't know about time. I can go ahead and maybe give you an overview of the transnational repression that also happens by UAE authorities. As we very well know now, the UAE have actually never shied away from exercising pressures and repressing dissenting voices against individuals who in surface may actually fall outside the jurisdiction of the UAE. And very interestingly, to do this, they mainly use a tool that is actually afforded by the Arab League. And this tool is called the Arab Interiors Ministers Council, the AIMC. AIMC is basically a specialized ministerial council of the League of Arab States. And the goal of this council is to allow Arab states to cooperate jointly when it comes to security and prevention of crime. This is their mandate. But the main way they cooperate is basically by issuing and circulating arrest warrants against individuals at the request of any of the Arab states within the League of Arab States. Actually, this mechanism is something that we have very recently found out about. We've only recently had to deal with it. And you know, the international community is only just now figuring out how it works, although it has been established in the 80s. But it's only now that we're trying to figure out on what basis it operates, what is the nature of this mechanism. Many have called it the Arab Interpol. Legally, it's actually wrong to say that it's an Arab Interpol because it doesn't function as Interpol. It's just an organ that circulates warrants. So yeah, for now, the information we have is just clearly not the full picture. But basically, on an operational level, the AIMC is just a mechanism that circulates arrest warrants, as I said. So basically, when a wanted person has not yet been arrested or their whereabouts are unknown, often because they have left the country, the state in which the state in which the person is wanted can actually issue a warrant and request the AIMC to circulate that warrant, allowing all Arab states to just apprehend and arrest that person once they show up in their own countries. So yeah, two big cases actually that come to mind related to the use of AIMC is that of Sharif Osman and Khalaf al-Ramaisi. Sharif Osman is an Egyptian political satirist who criticized openly authoritarian governments. And out of nowhere, he was arrested in Dubai and subjected to arbitrary detention for months. And his arrest was most probably took place on the basis of an arrest that was an arrest warrant that was circulated by AIMC. And the other case is that of Khalaf al-Ramaisi, which is the other way around, where al-Ramaisi was sentenced in absentia in the UAE 94 trial. And while he was on a trip to Jordan to visit a school for his son, he was arrested in the airport. He was detained by Jordanian authorities and he was sent back to the UAE to serve his sentence. And we have reason to believe that his arrest most probably took place on the basis of of a warrant that was circulated by AIMC. I don't know if you want me to stop here or.
Father, thank you for that. Let's leave it there for the time being. I actually have a number of questions that I want to ask you, which I'll come back to those in due course, because I'm very conscious that we've got Ahmed on the line from London, and I'm slightly anxious about technology failing us. So just to check, Ahmed, can you hear me? Ahmed, I think... Ahmed, can you hear me now? We'll get there. Bear with me. Ahmed, you are...
Yes, I can hear you. Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you, Ahmed. Well, look, first of all, many thanks for joining us. I know that you had a very difficult time yesterday trying to get here in person, but we've got you remotely, and I'm extremely grateful for that. I've already introduced you, but for emphasis, you find yourself now in what looks like a fairly damp London, and you are in self-imposed exile. You are an activist who I think, has a particular perspective on the nature of UAE autocracy. If you could tell us a bit about that, tell us about your personal experience, and if you could also tell us in particular about the UAE's tendency over the last 10 years or so to engage in mass arrests and mass trials. Over to you.
All right. First of all, thanks for having me today. Thanks for IHR Advisors and Naima for this event, which is, I think, is very important for our issue. Especially today, we are facing a new trial, which is actually retrial for our trial, our old trial, which was in 2013, and now after 12 years that we are having the new issue that they say it's a new issue, but it's actually just recycle, and they try to renew our issue again. Unfortunately, my experience actually it was in 2012 when I left United Arab Emirates, the United Arab Emirates. At that time, we had a problem, but we actually, it wasn't started. I had to go back. I was in London, and I had to go back to the United Arab Emirates in 1 week. Unfortunately, I had a call from my family telling me that they start to arrest your group. And we get the news that they arrested my brother, my older brother, and they told me don't come back now because they put your name in the list, so you will be arrested at the airport when you arrive. At that time, my family was there in the United Arab Emirates, and the experience that we had, it is really horrible because when they arrested the people, they were hidden in an unknown place, or I mean, no one could reach them for months. No one could know where they were. One of them, my brother, who is now 70 years old, Khalid Al-Nuaimi, he is now 70 years old. At that time, my family could not. They were banned from travel. They could not join me for 2 years until 2014. Then they could escape and came to me. Let me tell you about the strategy that the authority of the United Arab Emirates started with us, and they show us from that day, from day one, they saw us how the violence that it is there, we didn't know about it before, but the violence against the opposition and the people who had their right actually at that time to have their opinion, they have no right after that occasion, what happened in 2012. And it start by jail them, and then with the pressure that we had, they give them the trial, which is really absolutely horrible with the trial, who many of the worldwide activists, I mean human rights activists, tried to attend that trial, but without any result, unfortunately, because the United Arab Emirates Authority banned them to come to the to enter the United Arab Emirates, or even if they are there, they could not go to the trial, to the court, to reach the court, because it is even the court under the intelligence departments, no one can enter except the people they allow. This is the first strategy that we saw, the violence against the human rights in everywhere, that I mean, that was even with the people that they tried to defend us, to defend the group that they know it's a peaceful group. We had no problem with the government. We had no problem, but we are, they actually recognize us as opposition group, but we had no problem in general. We called for democracy. We called for freedom of speech, and that's how they dealt with us. And to know how far is that violence, they withdrew as you know, the citizenship from 7 activists, and that was really something could not be imagined at that time, because you are in your country and they withdraw your citizenship, so you can't even identify yourself for the others. You have no even self card to show that you are this person or that person. Even the driving license, they took the driving license. So they are very aggressive with all the people. The second strategy that they enacting new laws that support the violence as well. One of them that they call it the law of media, the new law of media, and this is let you actually be arrested with any opinion that you talk, that the authority does not agree with you, even that you don't know about it. You don't know that the authority disagree with you with that opinion. No, you will be arrested, and will be arrested and go for the intelligence department. No one can reach you, even your lawyer. No one can know where you are. And I know that Matthew had experience with that. That he was on a place for long time. Unfortunately, with this time, they don't stop torturing people. They don't stop torturing the detainees, and that's what we found out after we found actually how to reach them. I mean, the family could reach some of them, and they found out they had been tortured for a long time. The other strategy, they are harming the family and any related people. They will be harmed from the government. For example, many of our family members are banned from travel 12 years now. Banned from travel, banned even from having a job, and some of them are banned from even studying in the university. So it is they let the families be in a very hard life. They cannot practice their life like the normal people. So it is really hard. The other strategy, the term of terrorism, and I'm one of the people who are subjected to be from the list of terrorists in 2018. And you can imagine that I was outside of the United Arab Emirates in 2012, and in 2018 they subjected me as a terrorist in the terrorist list without doing anything. And I had been trying to reach them to discuss that with them, and there is no answer. To ask them, where did you get that from? And I've been living in London for that time, and you came up with this idea, but this is actually only to threat the people, to threat everyone who try to defend the human rights issue in the United Arab Emirates. And they did that for me and for other people, for other three people, Hamad and Muhammad Sagir and Hamad al-Shamsi and Muhammad Sagir and Saeed al-Tuneji. They are at the same list as well. So they tried just to stop us from being in like this panel or anywhere that we can talk about this issue. The last strategy that we see now, actually they try to not end the issue, to make it infinity. The issue of the of the people, of the detainees people. Now we know the new trial started in last November with the with our people who our group. They renew the trial again, and now it is actually will be the last trial will be in June, 10th of June, and they will give the sentence. And we are afraid that they have new law, and they said that we are terrorists, so those people can be sent to death penalty. This is what we are waiting for, and it is horrible. And they try actually to show the people that they have no limits in the violence. And we know that before that they did not stop violence and extend the jail time. I mean, all the people now actually they completed their sentences, all of them. But they used to extended that with the center that it's called Advice Center. Now they created this new trial just to show us they will not stop the violence against those people, against opposition. So what are their goals? Their goals just to control the opinion of the people. They control the citizen of the United Arab Emirates. No one can talk in anything without the permission of the authority in the United Arab Emirates. Unfortunately, I wish that I could, in this day, telling you good news about the United Arab Emirates and the human rights there, but unfortunately, it's getting worse and worse. I hope I did not take more than my time. That's what I have, and if you have any question, I'm here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for taking the time to tell us that. You paint, there's no two ways about it, you paint a very bleak picture of the rights landscape in the UAE. We're obviously sitting here in Brussels and you're in London. One of the reasons that we're having this event is because we hope to highlight the need for engagement of the right sort from European, UK, and other Western governments. What would you say if you had the ear of the relevant foreign ministers? What would you say to them? What's the headline point that you would say to them that needs to be done in terms of Western engagement with the UAE?
I see. Yeah. Actually, we know how yeah, they are close friends, and they know each other many times. And this problem actually, when it is in country like the United Arab Emirates, which show for the people that it's a modern country, and many of the people goes there, that will everyone can be affected with that. Everyone can face the same problem. This is, if you think this is your friend, you should tell them this is unacceptable for modern day. Today, the democracy is one of the need of the for the people to live. The democracy, the freedom of speech, that's one of the needs. So if you are really, if you believe in democracy and the freedom of speech, show us how you defend this value, this principle. You have to show the people, the world, that even that you have interest with the with the United Arab Emirates, you should show how you think about the people of the United Arab Emirates, how you think about the system of the United Arab Emirates to be good. Unfortunately, I have met many people who are not citizens, actually, who were in the United Arab Emirates, and they were actually had many problems even with their money. They went with their money and they came back while they lose all of their money. Why? Because there is injustice there. They could not, even if there is one person who's from the authority, he can do whatever he wants, especially if he is from the intelligence department. So I think you can do many things. I think that the value of democracy and the value of freedom of speech, it is it is for the positive thing for you people, even when they go there. The limit of that, it will affect you and affect all the region. You don't need the region to be in trouble, but that's what will happen in the future, and the generation which come needs more and more, and they see you as supporter of the dictators in the United Arab Emirates or other countries, unfortunately.
Ahmed, thank you very much for that, and thank you once again for joining us. I think we've got time for a few questions now. I know Jackie has sent me a message that we've had a few questions sent in to us. Just before we come to those, let me open up to the room in person. Any questions we've got from this is the usual moment of deafening silence. Any questions from the floor before we go to the questions that Jackie has? Well, I'll let you ponder what your questions will be. I won't pick on anyone at random, but Jackie, I think we've had some questions that have been sent in. Do you want to perhaps pick a couple of those, and I'll pose those to our panelists?
So I think we briefly touched upon this, but we have what impact does the UAE's use of cyber surveillance tools like Pegasus have on activists and journalists?
Yeah.
Domestically and internationally?
Well, I can say it's a great question. Obviously, Matt, you've touched on this, and I suspect this is one for all three of our panelists. We know there's no reticence by the UAE to use surveillance. Ahmed, you might be able to help on this, given your particular status as I suppose it's a rather loaded word, but a dissident, an activist based in London. Do you see the impact? Is there a chilling effect of UAE surveillance on the exile community? Are people afraid to speak out, or is it something which they have to take in their stride?
Sorry, I didn't get you. Can you
Yeah.
repeat that?
So, I mean, just to distill the question, what's the effect that you see as an exiled Emirati of the difficulties
Yeah.
caused by UAE spying and cyber surveillance and things like that?
Yeah, okay, all right, all right. Yes, I get you now. Unfortunately, as you know, which is called the Pegasus program, I think,
Yeah.
that's which is now very well known in the world, that the Emirati Authority, that they had this program to spy the people like us, and it is really horrible that we heard it is. They spied 500 journalists in UK only, just only in UK, 500. If you extend that for USA and the Arab the other European countries, it's thousands of people they were spied. I found in my phone, actually they spied me, and in my computers, everything they try. Some of them they try, and some of them actually they could reach. This is the behavior of the United Arab Emirates Authority that show us that they don't have any limits to control the people, to try to get the information legally or illegally. They have no problem, and unfortunately, they can escape even in the European country. They can do that, and no one even asked them, or the government, which was spied as well. I'm talking about the UK and the other European. We didn't see any action against that behavior. Unfortunately, yes, that happens, and we have experienced, many of my friends actually, the impact of that. That was very hurtful. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for that. Matt, have you got a perspective on that? I mean, you've sort of been on the other side of it in a way. You were the spy, as it were.
So the cybersecurity infrastructure ecosystem is embedded across society. So for any individual to open a bank account, to a passport, your driver's license, any personal information, they're all interlinked by a digital fingerprint, so to say. And what that ends up meaning is that your actions are completely attributable to you in that country. Your phone, as I said, your phone, your driving license, bank account, everything. And I had mentioned earlier as well that the impact of the surveillance is now, it's gone beyond controlling behavior to controlling thoughts. And I think that truly is the scariest point at which we see in the UAE, where people, they understand what they can and cannot say, what they can and cannot think. And you see it live in real time, and that's really objectively a very sad point to be at.
Jackie has just kindly sent me a follow-up to that as well, and I wonder if this might be one for you. Do you think, in terms of a European context, what should the EU, what should be European governments be doing to protect against what Ahmed has been describing about this transnational mass surveillance? I mean, we know it's not just the realm of conspiracy theorists and tinfoil hat wearers. We know this is happening. There have been so many sources across Europe of parliamentarians, of journalists, of activists, as well as perhaps the more obvious targets of dissidents who are the victims of spying. What's the European pushback on this got to be?
I'm not a surveillance expert, so I can't tell you technologically what is the capabilities of governments in terms of what they can do or
from
what measures.
From
But
a policy perspective, I
from a
suppose.
policy, yeah, I think mass surveillance first should be addressed. It's something that every time there is, a scandal on surveillance, there was one a few months ago with, we found out that actually there was a Geneva-based organization called Alp Services that was engaging in mass surveillance of journalists, of political, personalities, of human rights defenders. And we found out that these people have been subjected to surveillance from the UAE. This issue has actually not been addressed by, public authorities. So at the very least, is just speak about it, acknowledge that this is something happening, and eventually, I'm aware that some EU governments and Western governments, allies of the UAE, actually engage in bilateral human rights dialogues with the UAE. So it would be good to actually make use of that platform, use it as something to leverage the UAE, tell them that, I don't know, just tell them that partnerships with the UAE will have to, like commercial partnerships or tourism partnerships with the UAE will have to stop until, surveillance issues are addressed. That's from a policy perspective.
Matt, do you want to come back on that?
Kind of coming back on that, but to a broader perspective. What we've seen from Alp Services is not so much the government responses, but the fact that the victim in this is now taking the UAE to court, and you're not talking about small amounts of money. You're talking, I think it's hundreds of millions, because his reputation was so badly impacted. It caused the collapse of his business. This and what we've seen as a result of Emirati actions in Yemen and Emirati support to Wagner, well now Russia's Africa Corps, and Hemeti in Sudan, it isn't so much governments finding ways of holding the UAE to account, but it's actually the commercial exposure that's having the most impact. What we see is, because so much of Russia's money goes through the UAE, because of so much of the gold that's smuggled out or weapons that are sent from Abu Dhabi to Sudan or to Libya, there's a degree of association, attribution to it through companies in the UAE, through companies owned by the Abu Dhabi ruling family, and therefore any association to this is a massive commercial risk. This is what has driven a huge amount of behavioral change, not so much in the UAE, but through association with the state. So if you speak to the risk and insurance industries, this is one of the biggest areas and focuses at the moment, and it has been for a couple of years, because it's clear and in plain sight. Should the US decide to increase secondary sanctions against Russia or Sudan, with every week the UAE being condemned at the UN Security Council for their support of what's going on in Sudan, and it being directly attributable to Abu Dhabi, that's where there's going to be a degree of accountability, both in a legal, political perspective, but also in a commercial dynamic.
Well, thanks for that. Jackie, I think we've got time for one more question.
I think so, yeah.
Oh, yes. An in-room question. Brilliant.
Yeah, so basically I was wondering about the Israeli activities and enforcing lots of the espionage that's happening in Europe and the West. Like, Israel is considered as the ally, the most strategic ally of the US and Europe in the Middle East, but still it's the country that's fostering all those espionage and surveillance systems. Like Pegasus, it's basically an Israeli cyber company. Plus, for example, recently the ICIJ, the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists, one of the most important investigative platforms in the world, have published a full report about a new Israeli cyber surveillance company that's based in Cyprus, which was made by an ex-Israeli military officer, and lots of those reports, like Telegraph, published about it. You just mentioned it before. The Guardian have published about it. Has published like many reports about it. Still, the New York Times, the Washington Post, all of them, like the hugest and the most important platforms in the West have published about it, and still nothing goes on. No policymakers haven't made any changes, any moves towards what's like those like the source of the problem, which is Israel and its financing for cyber malign programs, and just sell it off to the world. And then we blame the other countries for using a malign service. But what about the source of the problem, which is Israel, which is committing a genocide in Gaza? And like, we're talking about democracy. I do understand. I do everything we talked about. But still, what happened in the US, students like in Ivy League schools demonstrating the genocide in Gaza, and they're being detained in the bastion of democracy, which is the US. It's like a hypocrisy. Like, that's not really what we as students are looking for. We're looking for, yeah, promoting democracy, but that should be global. We should look everywhere for that, and we should start with like the country that's most autocratic abroad, which is Israel in the Middle East. Is the country that's committing a genocide?
Can I pause you there?
Yeah.
It's a great question. It's a great point. What I don't want to do today
I don't mean to counter your
No,
argument
no.
at all. Just like a new point to arise. Because
Absolutely.
that's the source of the problem that we have in the
So
Middle East.
what I would do, if I may, if it's just
Okay.
yeah, there are a lot of points in that you've raised just then. I think, Matt, what I would like to take away from that is that it's clear Israel, the UK, US, whoever, the UAE, for now, it does enjoy a great deal of international support. I mean, there's no doubt about that, and there's no doubt about. I mean, I don't know the genesis of all of its spyware capabilities, but Pegasus, of course, is well known to have come from Israel. But they will have capabilities that have come from elsewhere. I think what I would like to pull out from our question just then is what are we asking the international community to do in terms of its engagement with the UAE and the military and espionage as well as financial support that it provides? I mean, as I asked Ahmed before, if you had the ear of the foreign secretary or the foreign ministers, what are you saying?
Fundamentally, it's to ask for an honest critique and review of what's called their statecraft, the behaviors by which, the comprehensive set of behaviors which explain their engagement. So speaking about the spyware, it's the broader industry, which is the issue as opposed to anything else, because they get it from Russia, China, Israel, whoever it is, they get it from them. It's the lack of legal oversight. But going further, it's Tahnoon bin Zayed, the National Security Advisor, who owns shares in Pegasus company NSO. So it's actually more embedded than the simple transaction. But we've then seen that Abu Dhabi is not so much, it's trying to show that it's having a balanced approach to its international engagement because it is an emerging power. It is using its immense financial resources in a very confident manner, and especially when the world is in, or at least the West is in, such a poor economic state. It's ripe, and it is craving for this support. The UAE is also not simply engaging with directly hostile actors such as Russia and China, but it's engaging in directly hostile acts against us. And this has been seen with Abu Dhabi trying to construct a Chinese military base in Abu Dhabi. This has been attempted twice, but if that should go further, that's a significant security threat and issue. the direct collaboration with Russia, with Russia's intelligence services against British and American security services within the region. But when it comes to their statecraft, and this is where they have learned directly from the Russians and from the Chinese, the amounts of money that they're investing in technology supply chains, in the extraction and processing of critical minerals, in the investment in AI, in high technology companies in semiconductor manufacturing, they are emerging as a globally dominant, not dominant, a globally influential actor and player. So when the US and the UK and whoever else wants to try and disassociate themselves from China because they understand that that dominance carries a certain subversive threat, all you're doing at the moment is changing this to another location. And suspicions are there within the public sector, certainly in the US, where critique over the UAE's behavior, over their statecraft, is being acknowledged as hostile, as being not in a shared interests. After.
Yeah, there'll be time. Yeah, thanks for your contribution. We're not dashing off after this, so I'm sure Matt and the other speakers will be around for more conversations as necessary. But we're running over time now, so what I'd like to do is just draw some things together. We've heard a great spectrum of views from a really interesting panel. The reality that we've heard today is that despite Dubai PLC, at recent events like the COP summit, things of that nature, that the UAE remains a authoritarian regime, and for example, Ahmed Fallah have made very clear that domestic opposition is suppressed, and that as Matt's made clear, the ability and also the appetite for the UAE to extend its repressive reach does extend far beyond its borders. And we've heard today about systematic human rights violations, cyber espionage, transnational repression abroad. And we've also heard a degree of hypocrisy. And also we've been given a very stark reminder that democracy and international values need to be upheld, and that there is a constant battle going on. So I want to say thank you very much to everyone who has attended today, particularly the audience who are here both in person and also our remote audience. And to our remote audience, thank you very much for bearing with us whilst we sorted out our technology problems. I also want to say thanks to Full Circle for hosting us today in this fantastic venue. And also thanks to Naima, whose name I'm sure I've just mispronounced again, who've come from Berlin today to support and publicize this event. Obviously, these sorts of conversations can be somewhat depressing because we sit in this room for the last 2 hours hearing these rather grim stories of what the UAE has been up to. And as activists present, as NGOs, as lawyers, I think it can be a de-energizing experience. But I think that there are opportunities and that we have a chance to continue to hold these conversations, to call our lawmakers and parliamentarians to account in elections, to engage. And I know that we all in our own way try to get the message out there. There are clearly ways of engaging with our politicians in order to put the pressure on them, and indeed our companies put the pressure on them to ensure that the rights and values which we espouse are at the forefront when we engage with the UAE. So I would urge all of you to leave with that message very much in mind. Matt's going to hang around, I'm going to hang around. Hopefully, Fella, you can spend a few minutes as well. So we'll be here to have a conversation with those of you who are here in person. Finally, once again, thank you very much for coming and good morning.
Thank you very much. Thanks.
Thanks, Ahmed.
Bye, Ahmed.
Bye. Thank you very much. I can't see you, unfortunately, and I wish that I could be with you.
Thanks, Ahmed. I really appreciate it. I know you had a very stressful time yesterday. Almost as stressful, I think, as I did whilst I was also at the Eurostar, thinking what the hell's going to happen now. But anyway, we did it. I'll give you a call later on and have a chat with you if that's all right. But no, I really do appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you so
Thanks.
much. Thank you.